When we loaded onto a small-wheeled steamer and prepared to cross the Volga, the next events flashed by like the frames of a movie, only I often wanted to close my eyes. There was no night. Rockets flew up continuously, some of them hung in the air for at least 2 minutes. In the city something was continuously rumbling, flashing, exploding. Destroyed Stalingrad seemed to glow with the eyes of hundreds of large and small fires. Our steamer was moving unbearably slow. It was still dragging a wooden barge full of soldiers. From the right bank German guns were hitting us. The shells rustled with some strange sound and burst around, raising fountains of water for 10 meters. Some shells exploded on the shoal, raising columns of fire, sand, and some kind of debris. I saw the vague shadows of airplanes. Bombs were howling. Or maybe I didn't hear the howling. I was in a kind of daze. On a sandbank in the middle of the Volga, a steamship like ours was burning. There were people running around, and the Germans had a good view of their target. Shells were exploding around the steamship, some hitting it exactly. Fiery pieces of plating and people's bodies were flying in different directions. We were also hit. A fountain of water rose near the bow of the steamer and fell down from above in a waterfall. I wanted to curl up, to crawl into the cramped mass of people on deck, but I stared like a mesmerized man. I wanted to see death, if it came. To lie there and wait for a blow in the back or head was beyond me. A medium-caliber shell hit the barge our ship was towing. The screams of the men blocked the rumble of the explosion. People went overboard. Dead or wounded, I don't know. Then I was sure that I would not get to the right bank alive. But in a few minutes on the shore we were being hurried away in groups into the darkness. I was climbing the endless precipice, grabbing the grass with my hands to keep from falling off. My duffel bag with 200 rounds of ammunition and dry rations was pulling me back. At the top we were scattered in the trenches. German machine guns were beating on us from a distance of 150 meters. It turns out that the city has already been taken. Behind us there was only 200 paces of land, a cliff and the Volga. From our side, too, machine guns were pounding. I recognized the steady pounding of the Maxim at once. Automatic rifles crackled and rifle shots slammed continuously. Someone pushed me in the shoulder and said, "Shoot, why are you sitting there?" I conscientiously fired 2 magazines at the flashes and asked the unknown neighbor, "What, the whole night we will shoot like that?" He laughed. "No, it's the Germans' way of welcoming new recruits. You've made too much noise." Indeed, soon the shooting stopped. We were hungry. We opened a can of stew, took out bread. Another soldier, student, joined us. He also took out a can of stew and a quarter of bread. The soldier with whom I was talking in the trench came to smell it. He was covered in clay, grimy as hell, and no older than us. We accepted him into the company. He ate steadily, didn't use his spoon without a turn, and told us that we were in a hot place. The Germans were advancing, and opened especially heavy fire in the morning. 2 lieutenants came up. They ordered me, when we had a bite to eat, to write down everyone and pass the sheet to him. I warned them to smoke only in the sleeve and to take turns sleeping at night. "You'll sleep during the day," he promised. "And don't be timid. We won't give them Stalingrad." What I learned and saw that night and the next day was that Stalingrad would not be surrendered, it was clear. Sappers every night bury dozens of dead in the craters. Yesterday there were 100 men in the company, and by evening there were 17 left. Here, they sent reinforcements, that is us, 40 men, so we can live. It's better not to gather in heaps in one place. In the 3rd platoon 1 mine hit 6 men at once. In the morning at least 100 mines were thrown at us. For the first time I saw what a foxhole is. It is a slit dug at the bottom of the side wall, and the bottom of the slit is 40 centimeters below. Sometimes it saves from mines, which the Germans launch from a distance of 200 meters, and they fly almost plumb. From an 80mm mine, it is still possible to save oneself, to be wounded or concussed, but if from a 6-barrel E-shock a pellet will fly in, then order a funeral. But heavy E-shocks with their 2-pound mines do not hit often and from afar. Mines fly with a big spread. So it's a matter of luck. Down below, under the bank, temporary warehouses, waiting for their turn to cross the wounded. In the vast tunnels dug in the clay cliff, there are headquarters, infirmaries. There are a lot of wounded. These are those who did not have time to evacuate at night. But the crossing is going on during the day, under heavy fire. Literally in the first hours I witnessed an unexpected and terrible for me sight. We were digging a trench and suddenly I saw an airplane. It roared about 70 meters away from me at the height of a 3-story house. I saw it clearly, a curved wing with an orange fringe, a cross on the fuselage, a swastika on the tail. What I did not have time to notice on the first airplane, I saw in detail on the second. Long cockpit, twin machine guns in the rear. And the third plane, exactly the same. The pilots looked straight ahead, and the gunners with their aft machine guns turned their heads to the sides. One even moved his barrels in our direction. They were dropping bombs on the coastal strip under the cliff, crowded with people, fresh reinforcements, rear guards and wounded fighters. The bombs flew on light guns, stacks of shell boxes, and went steeply upwards. Explosions covered the shore with a continuous swirling shroud of smoke, sand, flying lumps of clay and all kinds of debris. Behind the first 3 spiked the second. All 6 planes flew by with sirens on, all looked like terrible twins and went with a roar in the height, firing from twin aft machine guns. The scariest thing was that it was happening calmly, mundanely, as if German airplanes overhead were a common occurrence. On them, too, they were firing. The boat from 2 small guns, a counter-installation of our Maxim and some other guns, but the 6 left without loss. We stared at them like dummies, and then climbed to the cliff. "It's good that we were stopped in time," someone shouted. "Get down, you fools. They'll be right back." And indeed, a few minutes later 6 Laptezniki again passed along the shore, where people were thrashing, crawling, and something was burning. This time it was only machine guns that were hitting. A continuous streak of tracers passed the shoreline, felled people, blew up something else, probably surviving ammunition in crates, and the crackle of many machine guns seemed no less terrible than the rumble of bombs. Then 4 very fast fighters flashed by. We lay at the bottom of the trench and did not see them. We heard only the firing of large-caliber machine guns and rapid-fire cannons. Half an hour later the mortars struck. They hit mainly on the neighboring section. And then began the attack under cover of machine guns. The Germans attacked skillfully. Short runs, covering each other with continuous machine gun fire. And how many machine guns they had! Almost everyone. There was a continuous crackle. I was firing again with all of them and fired at least 50 rounds, sometimes without even aiming, just putting the barrel out. The sergeant grabbed me by the collar and told me to aim, or they would bayonet you. I started aiming. A German machine gunner paid attention to our activity and began to beat fiercely on the bumper, covered with stones, slabs of asphalt, and bricks. Pieces of bricks, fountains of clay flew up into the air, and some bullets penetrated even the barrier. We repulsed the attack and sat down for a smoke. Our grimy neighbor was from Voronezh and was considered an old-timer. He had been sitting in this trench for 5 days. His name was Pyotr. He showed us the famous Mamiv Kurgan. They're always fighting over it. It's a convenient height, you can see the whole city. Now the Germans are there. Our attack planes raided it. 9 escorted by fighters. 7 came back. The fighters clashed with the Messerschmitts. The battle was fought at altitude. Both ours and the Germans sought to rise and strike from above. One of the planes caught fire. Whose it was I didn't understand, but Peter said it was ours. The rest of the fighters covered the burning fellow, and the pilot ejected with a parachute and fell into the Volga. A boat quickly approached the place of the fall. Explosions, columns of water, but the pilot was taken out. The sky was bright blue in the fall, and the water in the Volga was blue, where the shells and bombs did not fall. And they were falling continuously. The crossing did not stop during the day. A warship, probably a patrol boat, was beating from anti-aircraft guns on German planes, simultaneously maneuvering, escaping from bombs. On the left bank, covered with woods, long-range guns were muffled. There went to bombing two-engine Junkers 88, with a glazed nose. The dense fire of our anti-aircraft guns covered the sky with cotton balls. Junkers, running into a harmless-looking lump, wagged sideways, and from the wing flew scraps. He dropped the bombs into the water and began to turn around, but the wing fractured. The airplane, spinning, fell toward the water, the wing with the engine beside it. I never realized airplanes could fall so fast. It literally crashed into the water with no explosion or flame. A fountain of water flew up, pieces of plating, and the Junkers disappeared into the depths. By evening, I almost got hit by a mine. My legs were swollen and I decided to take a walk. I went 7 paces away and there was an explosion. Right where I was standing. My ill-fated rifle, which I'd lost along the way, was smashed to pieces. Not far from me, a soldier, the second number of the hand machine gun crew, was killed by shrapnel in the back of the head. The platoon leader asked the student if he knew how to fire a machine gun. He wrinkled his nose and said that he had disassembled and reassembled the Degtyarev only once. That means you'll be a machine gunner. Second number, concluded the platoon leader. And I picked up a carbine of some dead soldier, standing in a niche. The carbine was light, but stock. I shot it, putting a few bullets into the burnt window cavity. The second day differed from the first in that together with the reinforcements we launched a counterattack. But we were allowed to run no more than 50 paces. The German fire was so strong. I don't remember how I fell back into my trench. When our howitzers opened fire from behind the Volga, I gladly, paying for my fear, fired a few rounds into the places where I saw the shots. In the evening a breeze came from the west, and the sickening odor of decomposing corpses, to which I had become somewhat accustomed, hit my nose with renewed vigor. My friend, despondent Pashka asked me, "Do you know how many of us from the training platoon are left?" 19 out of 40. Another day or two, and it will be 0. It was the first time I had seen Pashka in such a mood, though I didn't feel too confident myself, but I still said, it would be all right. I had seen how our howitzers were pounding today and the attacking planes had raided 3 times. But Pashka sat frowning and envied aloud the wounded who had been taken to the other shore. Many years later, when forgotten the terrible things associated with Stalingrad, will come to mind no less fierce battles in Ukraine, Hungary, near Berlin. But going over those days, still I cannot but admit that I have never seen such a meat grinder anywhere else. The Germans did everything possible to throw us into the Volga. Constant shelling, death at every step broke people. I saw a sturdy man in his 30s who was literally going mad with fear. The sergeant was dragging him and could not get him out of the foxhole into which he had crawled and did not want to get out. We helped pull the man, who was almost mad with fear. True or not, it was said that out of the whole company he was the only survivor. I and my peers were supported by youth and disbelief in death, although we faced it at every turn. Mortar shelling with short intervals almost never stopped. Weighty 80mm shells and small, cucumber-like mortars from company mortars were flying. 5 minutes of silence, and a whole swarm of mines, quiet again. Sometimes the long-range, 6-inch caliber shells flew in. They thundered so hard that I was thrown half a meter. When the shelling became particularly heavy, the Germans would open fire with rifles and automatic rifles, climbing on the ruins. For some it became a fatal mistake. Angry fighters, who managed to survive under fire and learned to clearly shift the fly with the aiming bar, were hitting the flashes with 3-line rifles. With a gambling fierceness sticking out over our shoulders, we were engaged in a dangerous hunt that drove away fear. I saw the confident German pilots, but I also saw the shot Nazi gadfly fly out of the window, clinging to the air with his hands. I saw a machine gunner thrown back by the impact of our rifle bullet. He was screaming in pain. They tried to pull him out. A 37mm thin-barreled cannon, long outdated, but suitable for street fighting, was rolled up to the barrier. They hurriedly put 3 small, almost toy shells into the window cavity, and when a German machine gun hit it, the artillerymen crushed it as well. Losing men, they rolled the cannon back. And those who were firing rifles in excitement also suffered losses from machine gun bursts, but the rest of the men pulled the bolts and shouted, "Fuck you, not Stalingrad. Hold on tight, you fascist bitch. I've had enough of Stalingrad." And we were drunk. But where was the vodka from? They only brought it at night. And I was more confidently hitting on the faces or flashes of shots from my carbine, and swearing as well as grown men. And an hour later we were shoveling and throwing into the crater the remains of our comrades, torn by the shell. At night, having drunk vodka, the 4 of us crawled to settle accounts to the nearest machine gun, which had already killed more than a dozen guys. Halfway there, under bullets, illuminated by rockets, we came to our senses, realized that we could not crawl over the bald area of the square with bloated, stinking corpses, and threw grenades from afar. The grenades missed us, though maybe the shrapnel hit someone. We were lying down for an hour in the crater. The hops were long gone, we were shivering from excitement, fear, cold, because we had crawled in our uniforms. In a meter above our heads multicolored traces were sparkling and mines were bursting with flight. But all 4 of us came back unharmed. For lack of vodka we drank cold water smelling of kerosene, which was brought from the Volga. But the Germans moved the machine gun away from the ruins. You can expect anything from Russian fools. In October of the 42nd year, in my 18 years, I had not yet known women, but all boyishness left me together with the deadly crossing of the Volga and all that I saw in the trenches of Stalingrad. Too many unexpected and terrible things fell on me in those days. I learned that a shell that hit a crowded barge pulled by our steamer killed 60 people in 1 second and maimed many. That the crazed fighter who could not be pulled out of the foxhole was really left alone from his company, and was soon shot by a German sniper as he was thrashing about in the trench. I saw that the night never closes over the Volga. Countless rockets, glowing shells and bombs, flashes of explosions, burning lakes of fuel from wrecked ships. Even when darkness suddenly fell for 2 or 3 minutes, the Volga glowed with lights for many kilometers. These were the burning wrecks of wooden steamboats, and longboats floating down, or the tarred hulks of the same vessels that had run aground. How many thousands of people they carried and how many died, sunk in the black October water. My participation in the fighting for Stalingrad, which would later be called the Great Battle of the Volga, lasted only 4 days. I managed to fire 200 rounds at the Germans, and I think I killed or wounded 1, for which the platoon commended me. I participated in a night sortie to the German trenches with grenade throwing, and in the evening of the 4th day I was hit by a mine explosion. It hit so hard that I lost consciousness at once. I woke up on a shoal, under a slope, covered with someone's overcoat. My whole body was burning and throbbing with pain. I realized that I was dying and began to call for an orderly. An inarticulate hissing came out of my chest, but the nurse heard me and, guessing what I wanted to ask, answered habitually and tiredly, trying to give her voice cheerfulness, "Everything is fine. Now you will be transported." In the hospital quickly put on their feet. Then I lost consciousness, then came back to consciousness. My head was foggy, but the pain was gone. They must have given me a shot. I don't remember the crossing. When I woke up again, I was undressed and laid naked from the waist down on a very cold table in a big tent. The operation was done under anesthesia. 3 pieces of shrapnel hit my right arm, between the elbow and shoulder, breaking the bone. The fourth one tore a piece of meat out of his armpit. All in all, not fatal. I was in the hospital for a month and a half. My wounds were festering, so I had another operation. Then I was transferred to another hospital. Here we lived in hotly heated huts, 10 people in a house. I was already considered convalescent. The plaster was removed, but I went for dressings every day. The doctors explained that the shrapnel brought infection into the wounds, small scraps of overcoat, threads from the shirt, and just all kinds of dirt, so the wounds are still festering, but things are getting better. In the hospital I unexpectedly met my friend. He was wounded 2 days after me. The bullet had penetrated through his shoulder, hitting his collarbone, and came out of his shoulder blade. He was also considered seriously wounded, but the wound had healed and he was being prepared for discharge. I asked Pashka if the student in Xenakik, the one who threatened to shoot at airplanes, were alive. The student was alive. He had become a machine gunner and was dashing with a machine gun. The company commander promised to present him with the dare. But Xenakik is long gone. A bomb killed him in the dugout. There were 10 of them sitting there. They pulled them out in pieces, and some of them were not dug up at all. I sighed. I felt sorry for my comrade, but the joy of having survived in such a mess overpowered the other feelings. It seemed that Pashka felt the same way. We talked about our wounds, and Pashka envied me. You have at least 3 more weeks to lie down. And if you fool around, you'll make it to spring. I won't be fooling around. I've heard how our Germans are beating the Germans at Stalingrad. I want to make it too. Where to go? To the other world, Pashka told me. Lie down before they push you out. Do you think the offensive is honey? More people die there. They're discharging me last week. They say you've been lying around for a while. We agreed to meet tonight. I was walking back to my room, and I was overcome by contradictory feelings. Of course, having survived Stalingrad, few people wanted to go back to that scorcher. It's better in the hospital. But many discharged, knowing that they would be on the right bank again, and did not whine. Not that they were willingly raring to go to the front line again, but simply when the deadline approached, the doctors included them in the list, and they packed their things, not looking for any tricks to stay longer in the rear. They even promised with anger, well, now we'll finish these bastards off. They'll pay for everything. In the hospitals, it was as if I saw the war from the inside. Of course, the conversations were monitored by special people and reported to whom they should. But the special officers, as I realized, looked through their fingers at frank statements. What can you take from the wounded? They would lie down for another week or 2 and then go back to the front line. And most of them have very little time to live there. I remembered one unassuming, brown-haired soldier. It struck me that he had been wounded 6 times since December of the 41st. Bullets had pierced him, and shrapnel had pierced him. He served as a signalman, had 2 children, and strongly expected that he would be ridden off in the stockade. Somehow they didn't sympathize with him very much. Maybe because of the fact that there were soldiers who had left 5 or even 6 children at home. I got acquainted with Nikita, a mortar gunner, the commander of the calculation. He treated me patronizingly and caringly. He did not like idle chatter, whining, and said that I had passed the first stage. There was nothing left but to finish the war. I didn't remember Nikita's last name, but I remembered that he lived in a mining town and worked on the railroad. He told me that 2 nephews in his family had died. Probably the younger brother had already been taken to the front, and he was careless and confused. They're a sure prey for a bullet. The sergeant shared his memories with me and passed on his military experience, which he had gained while at the front since the beginning of the 42nd year. The advice I remembered most of all from his teachings: don't get ahead and never lag behind. Stay in the middle. The extremes are hit first. My further military fate showed the correctness of this advice, although they killed the first, and those in the middle, and the laggards. I was discharged after 2 weeks. Actually, the wounds had not completely healed. The liquid bandages oozed brownish red. But my arm was moving. On the dynamometer I squeezed out 40 and more kilograms, and the surgeon said that I was a strong guy. The guys got 2 bottles of moonshine, and we drank them in the evening, snacking on buns left over from dinner. We talked for a long time, exchanged addresses. In the morning Pashka came running and said that he would take me to the reserve regiment, and Nurse Luba kissed me hard on the lips. Pashka complained on the way that his wound was inflamed again. They probably have to clean it again. He was evidently afraid that he had said too much, because they did not treat simulants with ceremony. Sometimes it came to the tribunal, and this is a punishment company, few people come back from it alive. That was the end of it.